The Outdoor Girls in Florida by Laura Lee Hope. Chapter 12. A Warning. Trailing vines hung from great trees on either side of the path. Large bunches of Spanish moss festooned other monarchs of the forest, which seemed gloomy indeed as the girls gazed off into it. Now and then some creature of the woods, disturbed by the passage of the party, would take flight and scurry off, fly away, or slink deeper into the fastness according to its nature. "Ugh!" exclaimed Grace in a low voice as she walked along behind Betty. "I don't like it here." "Why not?" asked Molly, who was in the rear of Grace. "I think it is most romantic. Just think, we may be treading over the very ground where De Leon and his men search for that fountain of perpetual youth." "What was that?" asked Mr. Hammond, turning about interestedly. "Oh, one of the old discoverers was searching for a fountain to keep him young," explained Betty with a smile. "Huh! He'd better be careful of what he drinks in these woods," said the overseer. "There's water that's deadly poison, to say nothing of the moccasins and copperheads in some of the swamps. If that fellow is a friend of yours, warn him to be careful." "Oh, he died some years ago," explained Molly, trying not to laugh. "Oh, well then that's all right," and the overseer seemed relieved. "Yes, you want to be careful of what you drink in these wilds. Of course, a good clear spring is all right, and generally you'll find a coconut shell or something like that near it to drink from. That's a sign it's good water." "What are those other things?" asked Amy. "Cottontails, did you call them? Do you mean rabbits?" "No, indeed, I mean snakes." "Oh!" screamed the girls in chorus. "They call 'em cottonmouths because their lips are white," Mr. Hammond explained, "and it looks as though they were chewing cotton. They're deadly, too, and so are the copperheads, which look just like that color. Be careful of 'em." I don't believe I want to go any farther," faltered Grace, hanging back. "Oh, there's none along this trail," the overseer hastened to assure her. "It's only where there's not much travel. Just keep a sharp lookout, that's all." They went on in Indian file, for the path was narrow. As they penetrated deeper into the interior, the woods became more and more gloomy, until even brave Betty began to feel a bit doubtful as to the wisdom of coming. But she knew Mr. Hammond could be trusted to see that no harm came to them. The path widened now and then, came to a little clearing. On the edge of it stood a hut, before which was an old man, so old, in fact, that to the outdoor girls he seemed like a wizened monkey. "Mercy! Who's that?" whispered Molly. "An Indian," answered Mr. Hammond. "An Indian?" queried Betty. "Yes, one of the Seminoles. He's all right, and a friend of mine. Hello, Coda!" called Mr. Hammond, adding something in a sort of jargon, to which the aged man replied. He seemed more like a Negro than an Indian. "He claims to be over 100 years old," went on Mr. Hammond, as he and the party passed through the clearing, "and he sure looks it. His wife is nearly as old." As they went on, they heard ahead of them the not unpleasant strains of a Negro melody. "What's that?" asked Grace, coming to a stop. "We're near Belton's place," explained the foreman. "He keeps quite a lot of hands in readiness, and they pass away the time singing and eating until they're hired. I hope he has some good ones for us. The oranges need picking quickly now." A minute later the party emerged into a large clearing, about which were grouped many huts, in front of which, and lolling in the shade of some, were a score or more of colored men. They set up a call for Boss as Mr. Hammond came in sight. "Howdy, Hammond," greeted the labor contractor as he came out of the best-looking house in the clearing. "Why, it's the girls I hauled off the sandbar," he added, as he recognized Betty and her chums. "Did you get home all right?" "Yes, and we've come to do as you said and hire some help for Mr. Stonington," ventured Betty, blushing a bit at her boldness. "Good!" exclaimed Mr. Belton. "I've got just the kind of pickers you want, Hammond. Quick, cheerful lot of boys that will work from sunrise to sunset." "That's what you always say," laughed Mr. Hammond. "I guess they won't be much worse than the usual run. Now, let's talk business," and the two men walked off to one side. "Oh, I forgot," called the contractor. "Young ladies, my wife is up in that cabin," and he pointed to the one he had just left. "She'll be glad to see you and make you a cup of tea." "Sue," he called, "take care of Mr. Stonington's girls," and a woman appearing in the doorway waved a friendly greeting to the chums. Over the teacups, in a cleaner and neater cabin than one would suspect it to be from a glance at the outside, the girls told of their trip. Mrs. Belton said her husband had told her of their predicament on the sandbar. "How do you like it in Florida?" she asked, after a pause. "I'd like it better if I could find my brother," said Grace. "He's here, lost in some turpentine swamp, we are afraid. I wonder if Mr. Belton could give us any information, since he is in the labor contracting business." "You can ask him when he comes back," said his wife. "And if we can get any trace of Will, we'll go there and get him out of the clutches of those men," went on Grace. Mrs. Belton started from her chair. "Don't you do it, honey, don't you do it!" she exclaimed earnestly. "Keep away from the turpentine camps, whatever you do. There's a desperate lot of men there, convicts, a lot of 'em, and there's worse men guarding 'em. Keep away if you know what is good for you," and she looked earnestly at Grace, who paled. The Outdoor Girls in Florida by Laura Lee Hope. Chapter 13. A Strange Tow. Betty, as well as Grace, Molly, and Amy, seemed much taken aback by the earnest words of Mrs. Belton. The wife of the labor contractor seemed under stress of some excitement as she faced the girls after the warning. "Don't go," she went on. "Don't any of you think of going. I used to think my husband dealt with a rough enough class of men, but those in the interior, in the turpentine camps and cypress swamps, oh, they are the most lawless element you can imagine, and no wonder, for no men, unless they are compelled, will work with those contractors. They have to keep their men just like prisoners." "Oh, dear, don't tell me any more," begged Grace, her eyes filling with tears as she thought of her brother. "But perhaps Will isn't treated as the others are," suggested Betty, giving the woman a look she understood. "He went there under different circumstances than the others, and he may receive consideration." "Of course, I don't know all the circumstances," went on Mrs. Belton, as she nodded at Betty to show that she would be more careful in what she said. "He may be favored. Of course, not all the contractors are cruel, but they have to deal with a bad class of men, and that makes them harsh, perhaps. But take my advice, and don't go near one of those places under any circumstances. Please don't." "Don't go where?" asked her husband, coming in at that moment with Mr. Hammond. "Are the girls thinking of going cruising among the Everglades?" And he laughed heartily. Betty was beginning to like him very much, as were the other girls. He was rough and uncouth, but he seemed honest and sincere, and his wife, a hard-working woman, had given of her best hospitality to the visitors. "No, they weren't talking of the Everglades," said Mrs. Belton. "This young lady thinks her brother may have been taken to one of the turpentine camps, or other camps in the interior, and she wants to rescue him. I was telling her to keep away." "And that's good advice," agreed Mr. Belton more seriously than he had yet spoken. "I don't mind mixing up with some men, but those contract laborers are pretty bad. My men are nothing to them, though I do get a hard customer once in a while." "But what can we do?" Grace besought. "If Will is there, we must get him away. Of course, I'm not sure, but Papa is looking everywhere for him, and the best clue we got was that he was somewhere in the interior of here." "Then take my advice, and let the authorities do the searching," said Mr. Belton. "The season won't last much longer, and they may discharge a lot of their men, these contractors may. Then your brother could come out on his own accord." "Oh, but it is so long to wait," cried Grace. "Surely there must be some way," and she looked pleadingly at the two men. "Well, I don't know," said Mr. Belton slowly. "I'll do all I can to help you, and so will any of my men, and I think Hammond here will say the same thing." "Surely," exclaimed the overseer, "but the question is, what could we do?" "We'd first have to locate the camp," said the labor man. "After that, we could talk business. It would depend on who was running it, and where it was. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll keep my eyes and ears open, and when I hear anything, I'll let you know, miss. What sort of a looking young man might your brother be?" Grace described Will accurately, enough so that Mr. Belton said he would know him if he saw or heard of him. "And now are you young ladies ready to go back?" asked Mr. Hammond, as he smiled at Betty and her chums. "Quite," she answered. "We have had a good view of the interior of Florida." "Ah, shucks!" exclaimed the labor contractor. "Begging your pardon, miss, for that kind of talk, but you haven't seen anything of the interior yet. There's parts I wouldn't want to trust myself to, not with all my men behind me, and I'm not a scary sort of an individual either. There's parts no one has ever been in, I reckon. Don't you say so, Hammond?" "That's what I do," was the emphatic answer. "Well, are you ready, girls?" They left, bidding Mr. and Mrs. Belton good-bye, and Grace received renewed promises that all possible would be done to locate her brother. Mr. Belton promised to bring a boatload of laborers to the orange grove in the morning, and as the visitors left they heard the soft strains of one of the Negro songs following them through the deep woods. The effect was weird in the extreme, especially when they reached the denser parts of the forest. Good time was made back to Orangeade, as the girls had christened the bungalow in the grove. The boat running well, Mr. Hammond complimented the girls on the manner in which they ran the craft, each taking a turn at steering, while the overseer imparted instructions as to various sandbars and shallow places along the course. Mr. Stonington was much interested in the report brought back by the girls regarding the lawlessness of the interior camps, and he agreed with Mr. Hammond that if any attempt at a rescue should be made, a number of reliable men must be taken along. "And I must write to Father," exclaimed Grace, "and ask if he has any clues. He may be able to give us some aid in locating the neighborhood of the camp. Oh, if Will could only know we are here, and would send us a letter! Just think, girls, he doesn't even know we are in Florida." "It does seem strange," remarked Molly. "Usually wherever we go we see the boys once in a while." "It is lonesome without them," said Betty impulsively. "I wonder if there is any chance of them coming down this summer." "It's winter up where they are," remarked Amy. "Oh, every place is summer to Betty when she thinks of a certain young man. Summer and orange blossoms," drawled Grace. "Don't be silly," snapped Betty with a vivid blush. "You know I meant all the boys, not one." "Selfish girl, she wants them all," laughed Molly. Glorious were they, those winter days in Florida, where the outdoor girls enjoyed themselves to the utmost. Had it not been for one little rift in the lute, their pleasure and happiness would have been complete, and that rift was the absence of Will. Grace seemed to feel it more keenly as day passed day and no word came. Her father did write, saying that the inquiry was progressing slowly, and that it would take some time to have scanned each list of minor offenders who had been hired out to contractors under an old law, operative only in certain cases. As for naming any special locality where Will might be, that was impossible as yet. Mrs. Stonington seemed very much improved by her stay in the South, but she was not yet out of danger, the doctor said, and must use care. Her husband and Amy were still anxious about her, and watched her carefully, for though she was no relation to Amy, she still acted, and in reality was almost as a mother to the girl. Amy's newly found brother paid one visit to the bungalow in the orange grove, but could not stay long, as his business was increasing. He reported all well in Deepdale. "By the way," he said with a chuckle, "those old friends of yours, Alice Jallow and Kitty Rossmore, have started a sort of automobile club. I guess they're trying to rival you." "They're not friends of ours," said Molly quickly, "and as for being rivals, we refuse to consider them as such." "Well, I don't blame you." The orange picking was in full swing now, and the girls spent many happy days in the grove. They learned many new ways of eating oranges, and marveled at the difference in flavor of the fruit picked from the trees from that as they recalled it in the North. The laborers supplied by Mr. Belton had proved to be good workers, and more were sent for, the girls taking Mr. Hammond up to the clearing in the motorboat to arrange about them. Grace hoped to have some news of her brother, but the contractor said he had not been able to get any clues. It was about a week after this, on a fine sunny day, not as warm as some of its predecessors, that Betty proposed a trip in her motorboat. "Let's go quite a distance up the river," she suggested. "There are new sights to see, Mr. Hammond says, and no bars to run upon after we pass the landing where Mr. Belton docks. We may find some new streams or lakes to explore, for we've been all over Lake Chad." This was so, the girls soon having exhausted the possibilities of that body of water. "I'm willing," agreed Molly. "And we can take our lunch and stay all day," added Grace. "Oh, dear, I wish someone would invent non-melting chocolate," she complained, for her fingers were stained with the half-liquid confection. "Some non-eating ones would be better," said Molly with a laugh. "Just the kind you look at, you know." "I don't think that's funny," spoke Grace, slightly elevating her pretty nose. Finally they got started, after repeated injunctions from Mrs. Stolington to be careful, to all of which they dutifully promised obedience. The trip was a delightful one, and no accidents marred it. They swept up on the river, which had hardly current enough to be noticeable. They paused to admire pretty spots, and stopped for lunch in a perfect fairyland of a grove, to quote Amy. The Gem was anchored near an overhanging tree, which served to permit the girls to go ashore dry-shod. Merry indeed was the luncheon. Grace was passing the olives, when she happened to glance toward the boat. Her surprise caused her to drop the bottle in the box of crackers as she cried, "Betty, look! Your boat is adrift!" "So it is," agreed the little captain, standing up. "I thought we anchored it securely." "And look," added Molly, as she pointed, "it's going upstream." The Outdoor Girls in Florida, by Laura Lee Hope. Chapter 14. The Tattered Youth. Betty Nelson reached the bank of the river and stopped. She could go no farther, for the muddy water stretched itself at her feet. But her boat, the trim little Gem, was moving slowly up the stream under the influence of the mysterious something that was towing it away from the girls. "Oh," cried Grace, "what can we do? Betty, Molly, we must stop it." "Yes, but how?" asked Molly. She and the others had followed Betty to the shore. "We must find another boat and catch the Gem," cried Amy. "It isn't going very fast." "If we only could," murmured Betty, looking helplessly around, but no other boat was in sight. "We must do something," she went on. "We'll be marooned if we stay here." "But what can be towing our boat?" asked Molly. She stood on the bank, nervously twining her fingers in and out, weaving them back and forth, as she always did when puzzled or alarmed. "Is it the current taking it away, Betty?" "But it's going against the current," Grace pointed out. "Some animal must have become entangled in the anchor or painter, Betty. An alligator, perhaps." "That's it!" cried Molly. "An alligator is running away with our boat. Oh, Betty!" "It may be that," admitted the little captain, as she gazed after her craft. "I didn't think of it, but that's probably what it is. I don't see the beast above the water, though. Do you, girls?" There was nothing visible except part of the anchor rope that extended from the ring bolt in the forward deck over the stern and slanting down into the water. "The alligator may be swimming just below the surface," was Molly's opinion. "He may come up pretty soon, and we can throw stones at it. That's it, Betty. We must stone the creature and make it let go. Come on." Betty laughed. The others looked at Molly curiously. She's hysterical," murmured Grace. "I am not," protested Molly indignantly. "But the idea of throwing stones at an alligator," cried Grace. "Why, its hide will turn a bullet." "Oh!" exclaimed Amy blankly. "Then what can we do? We have no bullets." "It isn't going very fast," observed Molly, as she watched the boat moving slowly up the river. "We can run along the bank after it, and maybe the beast will let go, or run ashore with the Gem. Then we could get it." "Who, the boat or the alligator?" asked Betty, who seemed to be in better spirits now, even in the face of trouble. "The boat, of course." "Then speak of the Gem as her, and the alligator as it," Betty directed. "But I believe Molly's plan is the only one we can adopt. We must follow along the bank. Only I hope if the alligator does let go, it won't be in the middle of the river, for then our boat would float down, and it might lodge on the other shore. Then we would be as badly off as we are now. Oh, what a predicament! We seem to be getting into nothing but trouble of late." "Never mind," consoled Amy. "Maybe this will be the last." "It's a comfort to think so, anyhow," agreed Grace. "I wonder why an alligator ran off with our boat." A mere accident, was Betty's opinion. Probably the creature was swimming along shore and became entangled in our anchor rope. It may be as frightened as we are distressed. But come on, if we're going to try to get the boat. Stumbling over the uneven way, the girls raced along the river bank. Sometimes the boat appeared to be coming close inshore, and again it would veer out. "I've just thought of something," exclaimed Amy, as they came up nearly opposite the boat, for it was being towed more slowly now, as though the creature having it in charge found it harder work. "Then do for goodness' sake tell us what it is," demanded Molly. "I'm about played out." "If we threw stones on the other side of the alligator, I mean across, between him and the other shore, it might scare him over this way." "Oh," screamed Grace, "don't you dare scare him over here!" "I didn't mean right here," went on Amy. "I only meant farther in toward this shore. Then he might run aground, and we could wade out and get the boat." "Wade in the water that has an alligator in it?" cried Grace, with a shudder. "Never!" "Well, it might be a good plan to try," spoke Betty. "I see what Amy means. When we were little and used to play with toy boats, if one went out too far, we used to throw stones in the water beyond it, and the waves would sometimes send it ashore. Now, if we did that, the alligator might think someone on the other bank was throwing things at him, and he would come over here. It's worth trying." "I am certain I can't throw straight," complained Grace. "Oh, well, this isn't a ball game," said Molly. "Any sort of throwing will do for an alligator. Come on now, all together." In spite of her protest, Grace managed to do fairly at the stone throwing. In fact, the outdoor girls were what their name implied. They could do many things that outdoor boys could do, and throwing stones was one of their accomplishments. They had not played basketball for nothing. A shower of missiles fell into the water on the far side of whatever creature was towing the gem. For a few minutes no effect was produced, and then the creature under water did seem to veer over toward the shore, where the girls were slowly walking along. "Gracious, if he really comes here!" cried Grace, getting ready to beat a retreat. "I'm afraid there's not much danger," spoke Betty in a low tone. "He seems too fond of our boat." "Throw more stones," directed Molly, and another shower of small rocks sailed through the air to fall with many splashes into the turbid water. There was a swirl in the river just in front of the gem, as though the creature towing it objected to the treatment it was receiving, and then, as the girls, anxiously watching, prepared to send another volley of stones, Amy uttered a cry and pointed up the river toward a small point of land that jutted out into the stream. "Look!" she cried, "a man in a boat!" They all gazed to where she indicated, and beheld not a man, but a ragged youth standing up in a broad-bottomed scow, poling himself downstream. He was headed directly for the gem. "Oh, he is just in time!" cried Molly. "He'll get our boat for us." "Call to him," directed Grace. "I'm so nervous that I can't speak above a whisper." Molly raised her voice in an appeal for help. "Hello there!" she called. "Our boat! Right in front of you! Can you get it? Scare away the alligator! It's towing our boat off! Please get it!" The ragged youth looked up, startled, and glanced from the boat, seemingly moving upstream without any visible propelling agency, to the four girls on the shore. He seemed much surprised, and acted, as Betty said afterward, as though he would like to run away. She called to him, "Look out for the alligator! Don't get into danger!" The ragged youth now seemed to comprehend what was wanted of him. He poled his clumsy craft toward the gem and peered down into the water to see what manner of creature was at the other end of the anchor rope. Then he waved his pole at the girls, as though to reassure them, and edged nearer the motorboat. "All right," he called in a quick, nervous manner. "I see him. I'll get him for you." "Gracious, I wonder if he means the boat or the alligator," said Molly. "I hope he understands that we don't want both, only the boat." "Oh, he'll know," declared Betty. She was eagerly watching the actions of the ragged youth in the scow. Suddenly he drew something from his pocket and held it close to the water, leaning over the edge of his craft. There was a puff of smoke, a flash of fire, and a report that sounded very loudly to the girls. "Oh!" cried Grace, covering her ears with her hands. "Be quiet, silly!" exclaimed Betty. "It was the only thing he could do. He shot at the alligator." Again the revolver of the ragged youth sounded loudly, and a little cloud of smoke floated over his boat. Then he shouted, "I hit him! I hit him!" He was seen to reach over with his pole and fish for something in the water. "I hope he isn't going to bring it ashore, the alligator, I mean,"